And then
Cool.
preparing to live stream the meeting. Got 12 in the room here. Okay, now Stephanie's back. Okay, we're gonna start recording now. Awesome. So, okay, and then I'm gonna admit everyone. Stephanie, are you ready? Awesome
Yes.
sauce. All right, everyone, I'm gonna admit everyone now. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to tonight's workshop. So I'm just gonna do a quick overview of what tonight's gonna look like, and then we'll jump right into the content. So my name is Tony, and I am a third-year electrical engineering and computing student at UOttawa. And today I'm here with UOttaHack and DSC UOttawa, and I'm here with my partners, Z and Skyla. So yeah, as if Z, you could talk about a little about what UOttaHack does.
Yeah, for sure. So hi, everyone. I'm a community coordinator along with Tony for UOttaHack, and we usually host a bunch of lead-up events and workshops, usually focusing on skills used outside of school and more so in the industry. You know, stuff like Git, even stuff like interview prep and how to apply for internships. This year, we've already done a tech intern panel and resume roast, but we still have a bunch of hype events coming up. So be sure to stay tuned on our event page on Facebook. I'll link it in the chat here so everyone can go check that out. And for this particular event, we're partnered with DSCU Ottawa, and I'll pass the mic off to Skyla for an introduction.
Hey, thanks, Z, and welcome everybody. It's great to see all of you, and I see some familiar names here, which is awesome. I'm the DSC lead for UOttawa, and we're a community-based group that helps you learn and develop new skills. And we're so happy to be here and partnering with GitHub to host an amazing event for you guys. So going on what Z said, we host a lot of events throughout the year. Some of them are technical, some of them are networking events, and some of them build your professional portfolio and your interpersonal skills. So take a look at our website, sign up to our mailing list, and just stay in the know. And I'll pass it back to Tony.
Awesome, thank you guys. So today is kind of a special day just because we have an actual person from GitHub hosting this, and her name is Stephanie. She's a software developer and she works at GitHub, and she's on the education team. So like this is right up her alley. So without further ado, we'll jump right into the content. Stephanie can introduce herself, and if we can save all of the questions either for the end, or if you have questions and you want to just throw them out there, you can drop them in the chat, and then we'll read them off at the end during our Q&A session. So yeah, Stephanie, take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm Stephanie. I'm going to be doing the introduction to Git and GitHub, which I'm super excited about because this is a skill I didn't learn until maybe later in my school year, like towards the third and fourth year of my school. So this is exciting that you guys are all here, hopefully learning it. And before we start, oops, Keynote and Zoom are not a good combination. Before we start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Stephanie. I am a software developer at GitHub Education. We work on products that span all the way from the student developer pack for students and GitHub Classroom, which integrates GitHub into classrooms. My GitHub handle is at Stephanie Jang. It's not super unique. So, and yeah, I'm based in Toronto. I am working remote for GitHub. I was recently a UOttawa grad. Like I got that degree, I think in July or June. I don't know when, but I recently graduated. My favorite languages are Ruby and Python because I like not having to deal with Java and having to deal with typing your variables. And my interest and what I work on primarily at GitHub is backend development. So I love working with APIs, authentication, and everything that deals with data and how we deal with the background. So yeah. All right, so we're gonna go over the agenda, but before we go to the agenda, I just want to give like a quick kind of overview of this presentation. Roughly take about an hour, give or take, depending on how fast and slow I speak. And we're going to go through a lot of concepts. So at the end of this presentation, you're not going to be an expert at Git or GitHub. This is a skill that takes a lot of practice. These concepts are quite hard to grasp at first. So once you practice a little bit more, they're easy to grasp. And if you don't understand anything fully, like, don't feel bad about it. This presentation is recorded. I'm gonna have a bunch of resources linked at the end and some courses, online courses that kind of walk you through Git as well and GitHub. So don't feel bad. This is just more of like an overview and like a really brief touch over Git and GitHub. It's not gonna go into anything advanced here. So if you're like if you already know Git and GitHub, this is probably not the presentation for you, because going over the basics, but if you don't, this is perfect. It's a good start. So yeah, the agenda is we're gonna go over what Git and GitHub is, the core concepts of Git, getting started with Git and GitHub. We're gonna go through some live demos where we're gonna walk through some practical examples of how Git and GitHub is used in software development. And we're gonna go over merge conflicts. I wanna, again, link you to a lot of resources. And at the end, I'll answer any other questions you guys have. All right.
Hey, I'm just gonna jump in real quick before you continue, Stephanie. First of all, I just want to stress like the importance of Git. My friend recently sent me a DM on Instagram, and he goes to UBC and he's studying comp sci. This guy had no idea what GitHub was. And it turns out for his first year CS course, their final was actually hosted on a GitHub repo. So students actually had to clone that repo in order to get their exam questions. And like half the class didn't know what Git was. So for the people who are here, Git is like one of the most essential tools that you'll use on a day-to-day basis. So I just wanted to stress the importance of Git before we moved on. Thanks.
Yeah, it's super important. And I'll get into it. I've done the previous internships where we use Git and GitHub before I worked at GitHub, and I'll talk about why it's so important and all that stuff later on when we get to there. But we're gonna start off with the basics of what is Git. So Git is a free and open source version control. It's the most popular version control today and for a while. If you talk to most developers in the industry or any companies, most of them use Git. And it's because it's easy to use, it's pretty lightweight. And the next question is, what is version control and why do we care about it? By definition, version control is a system that records changes to a file or a set of files over time, so that you can recall specific versions later. How developers use Git is they store their initial code into Git. And from there, you can make changes and save those changes to Git. And what Git does is it builds a timeline of what your software looked like and how it was built over a different time span, over like an overall time span. And that way, if you ever made a bad code change, you can always go back to a previous version. So here's an example of kind of like what Git does. So on October 1st, you made your first save to Git, and this could be your initial code, like your whole code base, for example. And then October 3rd, you made your first change, which is changing the background color for your website, for example. And from here, you can get a good idea of why Git is such a powerful and useful tool to have in software development. It can help track down bugs that are introduced by linking it to the date it was first reported. And then you can go back and be like, okay, what was changed on that date? And it's super useful that way too. So it's kind of like Google Docs for your code. And it's really great because you can go back and look at different versions, and it just helps a lot with dealing with bugs and all that stuff. So how do you use Git? This slide is just kind of going over the basics. I'll dive into this a little bit deeper, but to use Git, it is a command line system. So something you're going to interact with on computer in command line, something like you'd see like movies with hackers like typing it in the terminal, and you use different commands in the terminal to interact with Git. And I'll go over this a little bit more later in the presentation once we go over the basics. Now, you must be wondering, like, where is code stored in Git? Well, there's a couple ways you can store it. Well, actually only two. Is locally. So this can be stored in your computer or any type of hardware. It can do like a USB if you really wanted to. Or it can be installed on cloud, which many companies and developers prefer, because that way, if you ever lose your computer or your USB or a hard drive, you're not like, you don't lose your code. And there's many ways to do that, to store it on the cloud. And one of them is GitHub. And that leads to our next question. What is GitHub? Now, this is the confusing part because a lot of people confuse Git and GitHub thinking they're the same thing, but they aren't. GitHub is a platform built on top of Git. So you can store your code on GitHub and it will do it with version control using Git. And GitHub adds more features to Git to make software development more easier and to make it easier to collaborate with others. And it adds an interactive component to Git too. And I'll go on these features. I'll go more about these features later on as well. Now I'm going to go through the core concepts of Git. This is pretty important because this kind of also explains kind of how version control works in Git. So I'm going to go quite a bit slower in this section here. So we're going to go through some terminology. So one of the terms is repository. A repository is like a folder for your project. So a project's repository contain all your project files and each file revision history. A commit is a snapshot of your repository and the changes made. So they capture kind of what changes you've made. And going back to the timeline example, each dot here represents a commit. So for example, the initial commit will have all your files on the project. Your second commit will be the background color change. The third commit, new blog post, and the last one being updating a bio, for example. So each of those dots represent a commit. And represents the state of changes that you made during that time. The last one I want to talk about is branches, and this is a little bit more complex. So don't worry if you don't understand it yet. I'm going to go more into this. Branches are collections of commits arranged on a timeline. So if you go back to that example I just showed you of that timeline, you can go back. That whole line with that dot is a branch, and so that entire timeline is considered as a branch, and we're going to go into more. So in Git, we have a default branch, either called master or main, and this happens when you first save to Git. So when you first save to Git, you'll have that default branch, and this branch is considered to be the source of truth or the production version of code. So this is like the branch. This is the code you would see on the internet, or you'd see like on a current release of software for like VS Code, for example. So this is like the source of truth, the kind of things that you see. This kind of branch is something that, source of production will be what's seen on production. The default branch is commonly referred to main or master, but in this presentation, I'm going to use the term main. When making any changes to Git, or any changes using Git, the best practice is to create a new branch that's branching off of master. This allows you to develop and commit changes that are not directly on the default branch. So for example, main. So this is really great because when you're developing a new feature or you're trying to fix a bug, you don't want to commit things to the main branch that could potentially be linked to production. So for example, the internet. And so this is great for you to kind of have playground to kind of test things out, see how things are without committing fully to like, this is the solution, this is a fix. From my internships and at other companies and how we build software at GitHub, we usually dedicate one feature to a branch. So for example, if you're tasked with like building 2 features, each feature will have its own branch. That way it will make it a little bit cleaner. And in terms of like managing your branches and making sure people can, I'll get this in later, but making sure that other people can understand what your branch is doing. When you're done making those changes, you can then merge those changes back into your default branch, being main at this point. And this would actually deploy your code in a sense, depending on how you have things set up, but this code would then be live on production. So you can merge your branch in. And what makes branches such a great tool is with branches you can have hundreds and hundreds of developers working in parallel, work on the same code at the same time. So for example, in this graphic I have here, one developer can be working on the blue feature, and then they merge into master. At the same time, someone's working on a pink feature, and then they merge into master. And then another developer can be working on green as well. So this kind of allows you to have multiple people collaborate at the same time without having to worry about what changes are being made. So like previously, before I learned about Git and GitHub, I used email as a way to get people to like send me code, and I would like put it into like the master version of code, which was really bad because it took a lot of time. But this is a great way to have like people work at the same time and not having someone to manage like what code was in where, and like, oh, okay, this person built this feature, where did this go? And oh, this person built this feature. So not having like one dedicated person doing that. It's kind of a little bit more automated that way. With Git, there is a little bit of a workflow and how it works. So every repository will have 3 different zones. One of the zones being the working directory, next being the staging, and third in the final being the repository. The working directory is where files are created. Old files are deleted, or changes for existing files are created as well. And once those changes are made, then they're added to the staging area. And think of the staging area as a place to prepare for a commit. So previously, when I talked about commit being like making changes, you can also add files to that commit. So being like, I want to add the style.css file to this commit and the HTML and that's staging that file for commit. And once you're good with those staging files, then those files can actually be added to the repository, and the repository being the source of truth right here. So what's seen on production and everything, and that will be then added to the repository. Creating a commit will cause Git to create a new code from staging area and then add it to the main repository. And I'll demonstrate later on a demo on how this works and how these 3 different flows work as well. Now we're gonna get into GitHub. So the main features of GitHub. So GitHub again is a platform built on top of Git. So a lot of these terminologies will be really, really familiar to you since you know a little bit more about Git. GitHub is repositories, and this is where you can store your code in the cloud, and it uses Git as the version control source. There's issues that keep track of tasks, enhancements, bugs, and projects. Yeah, and in the last one being pull requests, they are used to propose changes to code. So after you create your branch in Git, you can create a pull request from it, and they're meant to have people code review, comment, and discuss your changes and make sure what you're doing is correct or not. And I'll do also a demo of how this looks like on .com too, or github.com. So now we get started on Git and GitHub and how you can get started with that and how to set up your GitHub account and get started with Git. The first step is to create an account on github.com. I'm not going to walk through this step because I feel like this is pretty straightforward. And if you ever get stuck, there's a bunch of help documentations that you can find online and also other YouTube videos that can walk you through this process. But I think this is pretty straightforward. But yeah, the first step will be to create an account on github.com. The next step would be to download Git. So I have a link on the slide for you to download Git. If you're a Mac user and you have Xcode installed, this should already be downloaded. But if you don't have it downloaded, just go to that link and I'll walk you through the steps on how to download. In the next slide, I'll show you how to check to see if Git is downloaded. And for Windows users, unfortunately, you just have to download it. Yeah, if you're checking to see if Git is installed on Mac, you can run this command in the terminal. So it can open like, if you do like a spotlight search in your Mac and type in like terminal, it would open up like a window, and then you do git --version. And if you see git version XXX, that means you have installed. If you see anything else, it means that you don't have installed and you should install Git. After downloading Git, you kind of want to configure it so that it can be linked to your GitHub account. So in the terminal, you want to use these commands: git config, the --global, which means that it will be applied to every instance of Git that you have in your computer, and for any future repositories that you use it for, and put in your GitHub handle. So for mine, I put in Stephanie Jang because that's my GitHub handle. And then the next step would be to add your email associated to your GitHub account. And that's the command for that is also there. Yeah. And the next step is GitHub Desktop. This is actually one of my favorite tools. One of my favorite tools because if you're a person that is intimidated by the terminal or the and it just don't like typing in commands, this basically replaces a need for the terminal. So if you're not super comfortable, this is a great solution for that. And I actually do recommend you, like if you're starting off with Git in GitHub for the first time, this is a great tool because you can ignore all the technical stuff and focus on the idea of what Git and GitHub is, and focus more on like, how do I make a commit? How do I stage a commit? And not having to worry about all the configuration settings associated with Git as well. And if you choose to download GitHub Desktop, it is pretty simple. You just log in using your account. So you don't even have to go through these settings that I put down in this slide, which is great. And I highly, highly, highly recommend. Okay, now I'm gonna go through a demo. I have a couple scenarios, two scenarios I wanna go through. And yeah, in this scenario, I'm gonna go over how to use Git using the command line and also using Git using the GitHub Desktop, because that's my favorite tool and I kind of use that all the time. Okay, cool. So in this scenario, I am a web developer. I'm creating this HTML page, and here's my VS Code. I'm creating this HTML page. My manager told me like, oh, can you push this up to GitHub, please, or Git, so we can get this version controlled? And I'm like, awesome, great, let's do that. But how do we do that? Okay, so here's my file. I have this saved in just a VS Code, like a text editor, and I put in my web page. It has a heading, a couple of paragraphs. I'm gonna bring in my terminal right here. Awesome, and I'm gonna go into that branch right there. Okay, cool. So from here, I want to create a Git instance first before I do anything involving github.com. So to initialize Git, the command is git space init. And this what this will do is it'll create a .git file, and this .git file will do a bunch of things like keeping track of changes on specific files, keeping track of branches, keeping track of commits. It's really cool. Don't delete it if you don't have it stored like on .com. If you're only using Git locally, don't delete that file because you'll lose all that version control. I made that mistake once. Don't do it. And yeah, this is great. So I initialized Git. I can also check to see if I have Git set up. I can do something called git space status. And this will just show me all the files I have in my repository that I created and show me, okay, I have no commits on yet. I don't have any commits in this repository yet, which is what I expected because I just started this repository, and also show something in the on track files. And this is what I was talking about earlier with the three like workflow stages in Git, being one, the working directory, the staging area, and then repository. So what I have here with this VS Code here, this is like a working directory. So this, I haven't done anything to stage it and get ready for a commit. But I'm pretty happy with my index.html, so I'm ready to stage this. So one way to stage this is to do a git add, and then I can put index.html. And what this will do is that this will add it to my staging area. So doing that, so I just did that command. Now I can do a git status again, and now you'll see something different. So you'll see here that my index.html is red and it was under on track files. But now when I run that same command, it will say changes to be committed. So this is in the staging area now. So saying like, okay, this is ready for commit. And let's say I am ready to commit this. I just want to commit the index.html. The next command that you'll use is git space commit. And then I like to do this command with an M. So with each commit, you had to have a message with it. You don't have to, but I highly recommend it because this is something that will tell other developers or other people working your project what this commit is. So for example, if you were adding an image to your repository, being like, your commit message would be adding a photo of a dog or adding the logo for the website. And being really descriptive with that will really help with other developers when they're trying to figure out like, why did this person add this commit into the repo? And it helps a lot. So for my commit, I'm going to say adding initial project file because I just started this project. Awesome. And I'll say, okay, one file change, and I added 12 lines, which sounds about right. And you'll say that index.html. Now I just want to confirm that I did the commit right. One way I can do this is by doing a command called git space log. And what this will do is it will show you all your commits that have been on that repository so far in the branch. Awesome. So it showed that I am the author and that this is my commit message, which is pretty cool. Okay, cool. So I have it set up. I have my first commit. Now it's time to push it to github.com because my manager's been bothering me saying that, what if my computer got ran over by a car? You know, we want to still have this code around. Awesome. So I already created a github.com account. So if you haven't done this, do this first. But once you do, you'll have something that looks like this. And oops, let me just move this Zoom stuff around. I don't like the Zoom bar. Okay, I can't move it, or I can. Okay, cool. Okay, so this is what github.com looks like. It's pretty cool. You have pull requests here where you can see where all your like, this is my test account. Oops, I'm on incognito mode. So see all your pull requests, any examples. You can also look at issues, any issues that you opened. It's pretty cool. You can also look at your profile. Something that's cool about GitHub is and you'll notice this when you start applying for internships or full-time jobs, is a lot of companies will ask for a GitHub profile because this is kind of your portfolio. So when you think of like a designer having a portfolio of like images of like the houses they designed or the houses they built, you can think of github.com and their profile as the same thing like that. So this is like a really great tool to have, even if you're not applying for a job or internship yet. A great tool to kind of build up your GitHub portfolio. And yeah, but oh yeah, I'm off track. My manager really wants me to make this repository. So I'm gonna go press this plus button over here. I'm gonna click new repository. Yeah. I'm gonna give it a name. My project name that my manager gave me was called Apples because we're making a website for apples. You can add a description being like web page for the Apples company. And here you can also tell it kind of like whether you want a repository to be public or private. And this is pretty important. I want to say this is most important because you don't want to make this mistake. Public meaning that anybody on the internet can see this repository. So meaning like I can, even if it like anybody all over the world. So if you don't want that case, for example, you're working on a school project, you're working on a school assignment and you're using Git, you don't want the whole world to see your assignment because you don't want other people copying. You would want that to be a private repository. When you make it a private repository, you get to choose who can see that repository. When you initialize this repository, it will initially just be yourself, but I'll show you later how you can add more people to that. And then here you can initialize repository with. I already have and set up my repository, so I'm not going to add any of this. But if you're starting a repository and you don't have any code for it, I would say it's a really good decision to add a README or all the other stuff to initialize your repository. But I'm going to create it as it is. Awesome. Okay, so this is what the repository looks like in GitHub. Obviously, there's no code here yet, so we're gonna have to push the code up to github.com, and there is some commands you can run here. So if you're creating a new project and you don't have any code for that yet, this is a great step to follow. But if we already have an existing repository, this is something I'm going to follow. So I'm going to copy these commands. So it says to git remote add. I'm going to go back to my terminal. I'm going to paste this. Awesome. We're going to copy this next one. Copy this. And then we're going to push this code to GitHub. Awesome. So I just said that they go push. So if I refresh this page, you should see my index.html. You'll also see my username here and then my commit message. So this is what a repository looks like. So from here, I can search for files, add a file. But I'm going to just double check to make sure my index.html matches what I had. And that looks right. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And yeah, so now my manager says that there's an issue with the website saying like I need to add like a header or something because welcome to my web page wasn't good enough. I need to add another heading for some reason. So in GitHub, one way to keep track of these tasks, which I find is super helpful, is to create issues. So my manager said that I need to create an extra heading. My issue title is going to be like add heading, add another heading to index.html. In my initial commit, the first heading wasn't enough. Need to add another. And I'll just create this issue, which is awesome because if, for example, if I don't have, it's towards the end of my day or something, I don't want to work on this right now, I can always come back to this issue and be like, oh yes, I need to add a heading to index.html. Okay, so how do we add to the index.html? So how this workflow works is you're going to go back to your code on your text editor, and I want to make some changes. But before I do that, remember back to branches and how I said, if you ever want to make any changes to your repository, the best practice is to create a branch. And we're going to do that. So I'm on the default branch, and I can check by doing git space branch just to make sure like what branch I'm on. I'm on main, which is great. So I want to make a change to index.html, and I need to create another branch for this. So one way we can do this is git checkout dot space dot -b, and this is the title of my branch after this, and I'm going to name it add heading to index. Awesome. So what this command does is it creates a branch for you, and it actually also switches to that branch. So I'm no longer on main. So if I do git space branch, you can see that I am actually on add index heading to index, which is awesome. That's exactly what I want. Okay, now that I've switched to my branch, I'm ready to make my changes. So in that issue, what my manager told me, I need to add another heading, and that heading is going to be like, here is the second heading. Awesome. That's great. That's awesome. And now the next step is to commit it. I am going to actually use right now GitHub Desktop and show you how commits work and everything on GitHub Desktop. Since I've already shown you kind of how it works on the command line, GitHub Desktop is my favorite, so we're going to go over that. Okay, so if you're using Zoom. If you're using GitHub Desktop and you logged in for the first time, this is something you'll see, is a let's get started. And what we want to do here is we already have a repo, like a local repo on our computer. So I don't need to create a clone. I'll go over cloning later, but I don't need to copy a repository from the internet. I'm actually just going to import an existing repository. So we're going to go here, hopefully. Well, let me do that. No. Okay. What is this computer?
Can we actually just take this opportunity to clone what we have?
Yeah, we can actually do that. I can do that in a different folder. Yeah, we can clone what we have, but yeah, we can do that. Okay, so if you ever, so one thing about GitHub is you'll see a bunch of repositories on GitHub. And for example, if you're a Ruby on Rails developer, if you go /Rails, you can see the source code for Rails, which is really, really cool. And you'll see kind of like all that stuff. And if you ever want to clone the repository, you can go up to here, the green button right here that says code, click it. And here's a couple ways you can do it. You can open it with the GitHub Desktop, you can download the zip file, or if you wanted to clone it using the terminal line, something you can do here is the command here, you use git space, copy this, clone, and then the URL. I already have this repository clone, so I'm not going to run this command, but that's a command you can use right here is git clone. But I'm going to open this with GitHub Desktop because that's pretty cool. And yeah, I'm going to clone it. So it's cloning apples, which is pretty cool. Now I want to make changes. So what this just did is it just copied that same code into a different folder on my computer. So I don't see any of this changes I made on it. For example, under this directory right here, it's under something called GitHub. So we can actually check into that file. I think it's listed right here. I don't remember where it was stored. Okay. I think it's under document. Okay. Yeah, it's under documents. So I can go into my repository here. And yeah, and here will be the changes here. I can also open this code up in VS Code, and I'll see all these permissions. I'll see the initial code I have in the GitHub repository right here. So this indexes to HTML here, matches the index to HTML here. And again, I'll just make another change to this. But before I do that, again, what I said is if you ever want to make any changes, the best practice is to make a new branch. And then GitHub Desktop, that's pretty easy to do. So if I click here under current branch, I can just click new branch here and call it, I don't know, adding second heading. Create branch. That's awesome. I am going to then make my changes really quick. Awesome. And now if I go back to GitHub Desktop, it'll actually show my change. So this is really great if you're a visual learner, which I think some people are. I am definitely a visual learner. I like to see all the changes here. So the changes you see here are in the working directory. And you can add different files to commits, for example, using this right here. If I had multiple files, I can, for example, if I just wanted to add index.html, I can click here. And it'll show you kind of what you changed in that file. So I like what I did. I'm going to do second, and add a commit now. So what's great about the GitHub Desktop is you don't have to worry about the things I've done earlier in the command line, doing the git status, doing the git commit m, -m. All this is streamlined a little bit for you. So I can just add a commit like this. Now, if I go over to history, you'll see my initial file and you'll just see my add second heading. If you see this little arrow over here, that means that you added a commit locally, but you haven't pushed this yet to GitHub. So I'm ready to commit this to GitHub. I finished my task. I'm going to publish this branch. So instead of doing git push on the command line, I can actually just click this button, which is awesome. And awesome. Now, if I go back to GitHub, you can go over the code. You'll see this message here that's oh, GitHub noticed that you created a new branch and you just pushed changes less than a minute ago. And now I want to open a pull request because I'm done with the changes and this is ready to go into production. So in a pull request, a pull request is basically a proposal for a change. So you'll see the changes and files you made here. My title will be adding second heading. And I'm going to say this pull request is for issue. If I do hashtag #1, you'll see that my issue shows up here, which is awesome because if I preview it, it would actually link back to that issue, which is awesome. It's for issue 1, and all this does is add a second heading to index.html. And from here, I can then create the pull request. There's extra features in GitHub that you can use. I'm not going to go over that because I'm just going to go over the basics. So, but you can see there's extra stuff you can do here. I'm going to create that pull request. So what this does is, we'll wait for this to go, is this creates kind of a space for people to then comment on your code. For example, you can leave a comment, and for other developers in your team or in the company to view your changes. For example, like here, I can, if I am a developer, let's say on the same team, and I'm reviewing this code, I can then give it kind of like a status saying like, oh, I can approve, I can request changes, or I can comment saying like, please make H in hello uppercase, for example. And that's how people can like then comment on your code and being like, hey, like this change, but can you make this one change by making this an uppercase H? And that's kind of what GitHub is built around, is collaboration. And this pull request allows people to then collaborate with you and make any changes. But I'm the only person on my team so far. So I'm going to say this is a thumbs up for me. This looks great. I'm going to merge this pull request. So what this does is this will take that pull request, the changes I made on that branch, merge it back to the defaults branch, which is me at this point. So click this. That sounds great. So I'm going to merge. So this is, it closes this pull request. And now if I go back to my repository in main, you'll see that I have another commit here. And if I open index.html, you'll see my second heading that I added to my web page. Awesome, done. I can go back to issues and be like, oops, not that. Be like, I finished this. And close it. And yeah, and that's all my work, and all my work is done, which is awesome. So that's kind of how the workflow for Git and GitHub works. And if you're ever confused or anything like that, I'll have resources later because this is a lot to take in. But I do highly recommend using GitHub Desktop for all your changes because this makes it pretty easy for you. Okay, awesome. Now, after that demo, now we're going to go. Now, after that demo, I'm going to kind of summarize everything I've kind of done in terms of making changes to Git on like a project using Git and GitHub. The GitHub workflow is basically creating a branch. And this is going to be a branch that is branching off of your default branch. So in my case, it was main. The second would be adding commits. So remember, one of the biggest things, the pro tips I could add for commits is remember to commit frequently. If you just sit there and code for hours and hours and hours without committing, you're going to have this really long log of changes. And that kind of defeats the purpose of version control, especially if you made some bad code changes somewhere in there and it broke stuff. You can't go back to an old version because you haven't committed that yet. So something I really highly recommend is committing a lot. So even just adding that one line, I would be like, I'm committing that. Adding a heading. If I add another paragraph, like maybe some copy text change, maybe I add another paragraph to the page, that's another commit. If I decide to change a background color, that's another commit. So make sure to commit frequently. So whenever you do make a mistake, you can go back to the start commit, be like, okay, I know that the code during the 5th commit I made worked fine. I'm going to revert back to that. So make sure just to commit frequently on that. The next step after you add commits is to open a pull request, and that's done on github.com. The next step will be to have people discuss and review your code. This won't necessarily be a step for you if you're working by yourself, but it's great practice overall to look over your code. Sometimes you find things going like back to github.com, going back to that pull request. I'm gonna look at the close one. Even as someone who works by yourselves, it's always great to look at the files change and see the overall change. That way you can capture any mistakes you have made. And to see if like, oh, maybe I should not add this file, or oops, I accidentally committed this file when I didn't really want to. So it's a really good idea to open a pull request and just get an overall view of your code changes. And because you don't want to commit anything that doesn't really work, because your default branch is a source of truth. Everything in that branch should technically, in theory, be working. So you don't want to commit any like bugs or anything like that. So you want to just review your code and make sure that's all good. The next step, and this doesn't really happen if you are working by yourself, or for example, you're just using Git to create like a school project, for example, just to version control your school assignment. But it's to deploy your code, and deploying means to like deploy it to the internet, to deploy it to wherever it is that this software gets released to the world. And this step for, I think for most of your school stuff will be skipped, but this is a good step to have. And I wanted to mention this because this is something that's used in software development in companies right now, is you deploy your code first. And then if you deployed your code, if you check to make sure that your changes look good on the internet. If it didn't, you can just revert that deploy and redeploy back your default branch, being the source of truth. But if you don't have a deploy, you just merge your code, and that's all good. Now we're going to go over just a quick review over the Git commands. Git init basically inits the Git into the project folder. Git add stages a file for commit. Git commit -m creates a commit with a message. Git push your changes to github.com. Git checkout. I don't think I've shown that one. I can do that one real quick. So I go back to my terminal right here. If I go do git space branch, it'll show that I'm on add heading to index. But if I wanted to go back to main, the default branch, I can just do git checkout space main. And I'm back in main. And I can confirm that by doing git space branch. Awesome. And so you can use git checkout to kind of go through different branches. This is really helpful whenever you do go back in, if you ever work in industry and you're working in companies, most of the time you're working on many features at the same time. So it's really great to have these features separated into different branches, so you can always check them out, make changes, and then go back to maybe a different feature as well. And this is something I do on a day-to-day basis at work. So this is pretty useful. Git space clone, and that's where you clone a repository locally to computer. And then git space status, which shows which files have been staged or not. Git space log, which allows you to see any previous commits. And I'm gonna go over this one real quick. It's git revert. The beauty of Git and version control is that you can always go back to a certain version. So for example, I'm gonna do this locally. I'm going to go back to my branch on my terminal, and I made some changes recently to the default master. So I'm actually going to do git space pull, and what this does is this pulls any changes I made or anyone's made on the default branch since I last pulled. And you'll see here, oops. So you'll see here it says that I can't pull because I have some changes. I'm gonna actually abandon this change, and I'm just gonna do a quick. Okay, so what I did right here, and this is not in my like Git commands, is git reset hard. And what this does is it just removes all your recent changes you made, and that's what I've done. And that's verified with git status. Now I can pull on main. Awesome. And you'll see that that in the git pull, it says I've added, there's been one line added to git index.html. So if I go back to VS Code, I can actually see the change. Actually, it's the wrong file. I can actually see the change added back into index.html, which is really cool. So whenever you're working on a feature, I recommend pulling in mass in the default branch a lot. And that's something that you'll get practice with time. I'm not gonna cover that too much because that gets a little bit more complex, especially if you have thousands and thousands of developers working at the same time. But that's something that you'll learn later on when you work in industry, or if you ever just want to learn more about it, you can always Google about it. But going back to presentation. Oh wait, I was on revert. Yes, the beauty of Git is to revert commands. So something I can do is, for example, if I don't like what I did right here, I don't like that change. That was like, I just didn't like it. That broke the website for some reason. I can do git log. I can see all the commits I made. Okay, cool. So I'm looking for this one right here, which is the merge pull request. I actually want to revert that. So what I'm going to do is copy this commit right here. What this is a commit ID. So every commit has a unique like ID, and this is what is an ID. You can do git space revert and then paste the git ID. I haven't configured my Git yet, but that's something you can do, or you can do it on Git Desktop. Here, if you double click, you can revert this commit as well. And that just adds, so if you look here, that my commit here is adding hello world. When I revert it, it just basically removes that commit as well. And if I configured my Git on my terminal, it would have done that a little bit properly if I get the merge option, but I don't remember what the merge option was. But going back to the presentation. Yeah, so git revert allows you to see what I think I copied that wrong, but git revert basically reverts a commit. If you ever made a bad commit and you're like, oh no, I shouldn't have done that, don't worry about it. You can always revert it. And people do it all the time in GitHub. They always revert it. And it's always great to keep history of reverts too, to see what happens. So you're not deleting any history of Git. We're gonna go over merge conflicts because this is something when I was starting to learn Git and Git, basically, this was really hard for me to grasp. And this is something that I run into on a daily basis. Almost every time I work on anything during my work, I run into merge conflicts. So I thought this would be good to kind of go over this. I'm gonna go over the basics of merge conflicts. I'm not gonna go too deep, but this will just give you an overall idea. So what are merge conflicts? A merge conflict occurs when you have a competing commit. For example, if someone is editing the same line in the same file that you are working. So Git basically freaks out and be like, I don't know what line you want me to actually use. So this requires human intervention. And again, they're pretty common when you have more than one person working in the repository. When you have a merge conflict, you have to tell Git what changes you want to incorporate into your final merge back into the default branch. And this is pretty intimidating at first, but I want to kind of go through a walkthrough of what that looks like and how you can fix it. And I have an example here. In my repo of merge conflict example, here in my repo, I have 2 commits. I want to just look at one of them. And this one just adds a title to a page, which is awesome. That's exactly, and that looks great to me. So I'm going to merge this. Awesome. And I also have a second PR open, or pull request I have open, and I also really like to merge that. But this is no longer green. It says this branch has conflicts that must be resolved. And it'll show you the conflicting files. So, and I want to look at this PR real quick. And you'll see kind of a common theme of what happened in the last PR. I also edited line 1. So if I could bring back that post incognito mode. If I go back to my repository on the main branch, if I look back into here, I'll see that like in this commit, I added a title to the first line. And in my next pull request, I'm also doing the same thing. So Git is not sure, like what line should I use? You need to tell me what's happening here. So one way you can do this is in github.com, and which I'm going to show is how to do this in github.com. and click the resolve conflicts. And what you'll see here is your changes. So in main, in the default branch, in line 1, this is what it is right now, is title of this page. And then up here is the current change you're proposing. So whatever is in your pull request. So I know that I kind of want both of these lines in the final version of my code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this. And whenever you make like a fix with merge conflicts, always remove any of these like equal signs or these arrows, or else Git will still think that there's a problem with the file. So I'm going to remove this because I want to keep both lines actually. And actually, I'm going to reorganize these lines too. So I'm going to take this one from the main branch and the default branch, copy that, and paste it above my current change because I want the first heading to be first and the second. And that looks good to me. So I'm actually going to mark this conflict as resolved. Awesome. And now I can commit this merge. So what this is going to do is going to bring me back to my pull request, and I can review it now, and you'll see like, oh, okay. So previously, this change was on line 1, but now it's on line 2 because I told Git I actually want this change to be below the original line, which is awesome. And yeah, and that's like a basic merge conflict fix. They get more complicated again with the more people work in the file or the bigger the change. But I just went through like a simple one just to get kind of get you familiar with what a merge conflict is, and then I can merge this change as well after that's fixed. Yeah, that was a demo. And this kind of concludes kind of my intro to Git and GitHub. For next steps, again, when I said at the beginning of this presentation, Git is not going to be a skill that's mastered overnight. It requires a lot of practice, so much practice. It's something that even as I'm working at GitHub and I've done a few internships, I'm still learning about Git and different commands I can use to kind of make my work more efficient. So it does require more practice, a lot of practice. And something that I've done to kind of get more familiar with Git and GitHub is actually use on school projects and assignments. And it's a great way to practice because no one else is working with you, and it just gets familiar with the idea of a pull request, committing frequently. And if you ever do run into problems, merge conflicts, they're a great practice as well. And yeah, that's something I would recommend. For resources, because I know this is a skill that's not learned overnight, I actually found this learning lab, which is something that's owned by GitHub, really, really helpful. It kind of walks you through GitHub and all the features and how to work and how Git works as well. And along with the tutorial, which is a walkthrough, you also build a web page, which is really cool. And it goes into even like a cooler feature of GitHub, which is called GitHub Pages, which can host your web page for free. So you can build a web page and host on the internet for free, which is really cool. I recommend looking at that. Something I also recommend is the Git cheat sheet. This is something that I recommend you having printing, like print. I'm actually gonna open this. Hopefully this will open. I actually recommend printing this if you're ever working with Git and GitHub and having it next to you, because this is great because it'll just have the quick like Git commands you need. So if you ever need to install on Git and then, okay, cool, create repositories. Okay, cool, it'll show you how to turn existing directory into Git repository and how to clone one. It'll show you how to configure your Git on your computer to make sure that things work properly. It just goes through a bunch of quick commands if you ever need, like, I don't remember what that's called, or like, I need to do something, but I don't know what it is. This is a great page to look at. And yeah, and it also walks you through the GitHub flow too here as well. So that's something that I highly recommend. And the next one would be another learning lab course, which is managing merge conflicts. If you ever, this is something that takes a lot of practice too. And this course is a great way to kind of walk you through it and make you less nervous about them. Because when I was beginning, I hated merge conflicts. I avoid them as much as possible. I made sure to be like, are you working on this file? Because I won't touch it, because like I don't want to deal with it. But after working with Git, merge conflicts are not that scary anymore. So that's a great resource as well. The next one would be the GitHub Developer Pack. I'm assuming all you are students, and if you are students, you get this free amazing tool that basically gives you free things, which is really cool. And also, and I want to open this this link as well. And basically, you get a lot of cool things to if you ever want to build like a project, for example. Let me type this in. I didn't link that in my presentation, but you get some really cool stuff. So if you click here, you can see in the path, you can get free, you get name.com discount, Namecheap discount. If you ever want to build your own website, which is really cool. Microsoft Azure, you get some credits there. You get a free GitHub Pro account, which gives you more features. All these things, I'm going to scroll them really quickly, but they're really cool. I am still considered a student because when you apply, it lasts for 2 years, but mine's about to run out, and I'm really sad because I won't get all these free things anymore if you ever want to build a project. So even Stripe is really cool. Which is really cool because wave transactions the first 1,000 is kind of cool. So yeah, if you ever want to apply, I recommend applying soon. This is a tool. This is something that will take a couple months to get approved because everyone all over the world is applying. So I would recommend applying soon, so that whenever you want to build a project, you have access to all these really cool tools that are used in the industry, such as like Heroku, AWS, and all that stuff. And yeah, and that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was honestly super thorough. Like I learned so much, and I've been using Git for a while. So like, I think that was a really good start to whoever didn't know about Git at all. And before we move into Q&As, I kind of want to just do like a quick story time. So throwback to 2017, like my first ever hackathon. Like I'm a grade 11 student, go to Hack the North 2017, and I'm like super stoked to like code, and I've never coded at that point. So I joined this team. I pretend that I'm a pro so I can join a team, and I joined the team. And lo and behold, they're like, yo, like, do you have a GitHub account? I'm like, what is GitHub? You know, like, what is this thing? And I learned GitHub for the first time at a hackathon. And although Stephanie was super thorough with like all of her explanations, by the way, all of this was recorded on YouTube. So if you missed anything, we'll have it posted on our YouTube channel, and we're gonna have it indexed so that you can, like a table of contents type deal, so you can navigate to which section you missed out on for anyone who joined late. Anyways, going back to my story, for beginners, Git can seem very daunting. Even like just pulling up the command line, everyone's like, whoa, like hacker man, like that's crazy. Like I can't do that, right? So I am gonna recommend this tool called Git Kraken. It's kind of similar to Stephanie's favorite tool, which is GitHub Desktop, but it's so much better. Like I love Git Kraken so much, and I've never used CLI. Like I've never used the Git command line. I never use Git Desktop. Probably a bad thing to say because Stephanie works for GitHub. Obviously, those tools are amazing as well. But for beginners, I think Git Kraken is like one of the best tools to get your foot in the door. And certainly for me, it made my life so much easier, like as like a first time Git user. So I'm gonna share my screen, and I'm just gonna quickly show you what it looks like. And I recommend you download it. So yeah, let me share my screen.
I do totally agree with you, by the way, on Git being a little bit hard. And what you'll hear, I don't know if anyone hears this from other people, it's in their classes, is if you don't use the command line, you're not a developer. That's what I've heard many times from other people. That's just so not true. I work at GitHub. A lot of people use GitHub Desktop. It just makes it a little bit easier, so you don't have to worry about staging and all that stuff. So don't worry if you hear people say that if you use GitHub Desktop, you're not a developer. You totally are. You still are. You're just more efficient than the rest of them. I'm just saying.
Exactly. 100%. Like, I personally love GUIs. I try to stay far away from terminals as possible, just because I'm like that. I like seeing things, you know. So I'm just gonna do like a quick demo, just because this has already been an hour, and I don't want to keep you guys here. But Stephanie was talking about using GitHub for school, and man, I have found so many of my course labs on GitHub. Like for example, my data structures and algorithms course, like I used some of these labs that other people have made and put on GitHub. I didn't copy them. But basically, you can find other people's repos. Let's just quickly clone this one. This is what I was talking about. This is Git Kraken. It's slightly more features than GitHub Desktop, which is why I like it. And it's like so much more easier for me to work on. So it's like clone. You can, there's obviously other Git providers, but we're gonna stick with GitHub. But right now we're gonna clone with a URL. So you paste that URL in, and then you clone the repo. I just wanted to just throw that out there and just say that Git Kraken is an option, and I would really recommend it for starters. I still use like the command line and Git Desktop every now and then, but this is mostly my main setup, which is Git Kraken. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. So now I'm going to open the floor up to Q&As. Yeah, doesn't look like we have any questions. I thought Stephanie was super thorough in like everything. Like I honestly didn't even know what pull requests were. Like I should, but I learned a lot. And yeah, if you guys missed anything, then you can always go back to our YouTube channel. Just go on YouTube, search DSCU Ottawa. And UAutoHack's going to have a video up as well, so you can rewatch this entire seminar for people who came in late. Yeah, and so we're probably going to wrap things up now, kind of seeing as no one has any questions. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for taking time out of your busy life to come and teach this session. I certainly found it super useful, and yeah. Just before you guys go, Skyla's going to talk to you guys about some upcoming events we have. And yeah, we'll part ways after that.
Yeah, so we've got 2 more events coming up in October, and then moving into November, we'll have a few more that are still in the works. If you are a first-year student taking the Python course, we are having a workshop for you guys on the 29th. So that's going over some midterm prep, going over past exams, and getting you guys ready for test number 2. And then we'll be working with you guys to prepare for the other tests that are coming up. And if you're not in the ITI Python class and you just want to learn a bit more about Python or get a refresher on the basics, we are partnering with another DSC from Georgia who's going to be going over the basics of Python. So going from just basic syntax until a little bit more basic, complicated data structures. So that's coming up on the 30th as well. If you guys aren't doing anything, then I definitely recommend checking out that workshop. So yeah, and then in November, we have a Photoshop workshop coming up, and those details will be posted soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Skyla. And if you guys haven't done so already, head on over to Facebook and follow and like both UAutoHack and developer student clubs at the University of Ottawa. There's another DSCUO page out there that's not us, it was the club from before, so just watch out that you are liking the correct one. And we're also both on Instagram. You can find us at UAutoHack and at DSC_UOttawa. So yeah, definitely tune in for our future events, and thank you guys all so much for coming. And again, a big thank you to Stephanie from GitHub. She was not paid for this, so she has a really kind soul for being here. Raymond, where can I sign up for the workshops later this week? You can head over to, I'll actually drop you our DSC community link. 1 second here, dsc.community, and yeah, so I'll drop this link in the chat for all of you guys. And if you go under events, you'll be able to see all of our upcoming events that you can register for. So right now I'm seeing Intro to Git workshop, ITI 1120 midterm review. That is probably gonna be a very fantastic workshop. I highly recommend you come to that one. And Introduction to Python also. Yeah, Skyla started sharing her screen. So yeah, that's where you can sign up. And usually we'll have Facebook events as well, but this is definitely the place to go for now because it's always updated. So Yep. Is there anything that anyone wanted to add before we kind of shut down our meeting here and call it a night? Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming. And yeah, tune into our next workshops.